When you think of a garden, what is the first image that comes to mind? Is it long, straight rows planted in tilled soil? Or raised beds of plants? But what about a forest? Sure, we know that some wild fruits grow in the forest, like blueberries, but what if an area included a large concentration of different species of plants that were the result of human activity? Like plants being relocated to the area and then maintained for hundreds of years. What if the soil in that forest was so specialized and unique that the plants growing in it could not grow in any other type of soil? The ground a result of decades after decades of soil enhancement via human interaction. Those are just two of the unique characteristics of the Kitselas Canyon Forest Garden, a rediscovery that is changing the understanding of the subsistence practices of the Gitselasu, the people of the canyon. Welcome to the Kitselas Canyon, the crown jewel of the Kitselas people. We are located approximately 20 kilometers east of the city of Terrace, British Columbia. The canyon is a beautiful area with rich history of our culture, including petroglyphs, culturally modified trees, and several archaeological sites. The Skeena River narrows at the Kitselas Canyon. Prior to contact, the Kitselas were the toll keepers of the Skeena River. Anyone wanting to pass through this region of our territory were required to provide a payment. The canyon was occupied until approximately 150 years ago. In 1972, this area was declared a National Historic Site. It is filled with the knowledge and culture of our people. Some less visible than others. Modern archaeological research is changing the colonial view of our culture, from hunter-gatherers to innovators who created and maintained a productive and sustainable forest garden, which required high levels of technical skills and knowledge, passed down from generation to generation for hundreds of years. Dr. Chelsea Armstrong is one of the archaeologists that has been studying the Kitselas Canyon. I sat down with her to talk about the forest garden.
The term forest garden, it definitely has a bit of a legacy in anthropology and ecology, and it stems from a concept in Central and South America where people managed, manipulated forest environments and kind of combined horticulture and agricultural practices with natural forest processes. And even though we're starting to see it in other places around the world, it's a practice that's been around globally for thousands of years, whether it's in Northeast India, in parts of Thailand, in the savannas of Africa, or here in the Pacific Northwest. It's a uniquely human phenomenon to manage a forest. And what we see globally is a lot of diversity in how forest gardens are arranged and managed, but also some commonalities. So for example, this idea of assisted succession, that you have a standing forest, and through human disturbance or engineering, part of that forest is removed, and then whatever grows back is assisted by people or encouraged for the things that they want, and then the things that they don't want are removed, and it's kind of this iterative management process that also relates to the field or the world of what's now called permaculture, which is a very kind of sexy scientific term or recent term. It's just about growing food within the constraints of your environment, so not relying on a lot of outside inputs like fertilizers or irrigation, but really working with what grows in an area naturally, and then enhancing that again for human use and consumption. And so now we see it as a popular term, permaculture, something that a lot of agroecologists and farmers are taking up and wanting to adapt. But again, this is just forest gardening. It's something that's been done for thousands of years.
The forest garden is approximately 200 square meters and located close to where the village site of Gitseax had stood. For those wondering, can't these plants just naturally grow together? Sure, but this collection does not appear to be the result of chance.
Say you have a naysayer who says, but these plants just naturally like each other and they companion plant all the time. What is it about a forest garden that contradicts that?
Yeah, well, that's a really big question, because methodologically I can answer that, by just looking at the genetic structure of hazelnut, for example, in different forest gardens. I could look at the ethnographic record. We know elders talk often about managing plants, about transplanting, about aerating for root harvests, all sorts of management practices that are going to have an impact on the landscape. And so it's to me it's kind of a no-brainer that forest gardens are human managed, and proving that isn't hard. What's hard is the conceptual idea that indigenous peoples managed lands, and under colonial assumptions, this idea that people manage lands was just impossible. And so we're still fighting against this stereotype or these assumptions. Indigenous peoples didn't manage the land. They were just kind of opportunistic hunter-gatherers that would pick a few berries and carry on with their day instead of actually engineering and managing their lands, which we know they did. And so for naysayers, I find the data is very clear. Again, as far as just looking at what plants are growing together and why, and how that kind of obfuscates what we would see in a so-called natural environment or natural distribution of plants. But again, it's a conceptual problem more than anything, to try and get people to wrap their head around old stereotypes.
And when I've been doing some research recently with Layla, the high bush cranberry, we found one in the forest garden. It was the first one I've seen away from water, and that was really interesting. I wonder if there are any other type of situations like that lend support that these plants were brought in.
Yeah, so one of the things that historical ecologists like myself will do is look at a landscape and ask, how did it get this way? And the key is to look at both cultural and biophysical patterns and processes. So these are things like plants that are growing outside of their natural range or natural habitat, plants associated with human habitation sites like archaeological sites, plants that are aggregating in these different structures and compositions from what we would see somewhere else. So for example, species aggregations that are more diverse. For example, at the Gitseax forest garden, it includes, dozens and dozens of food plants that certainly you'll see maybe on the side of the highway, a few things growing alone like a red elderberry or Pacific crabapple. These aren't, endangered species, but what is unique is that they're growing all together in one spot. So it's this unique aggregation of all of them together. Like you say, sometimes growing outside of their natural habitat, like a high bush cranberry growing at higher elevations, not near water, or for example, rice root, which we know is it's a coastal plant. It likes saltwater marshes, and yet we see it at the Gitseax Kitselas forest garden, which tells us that people had a hand in moving it there.
Genetic testing has provided evidence that the beaked hazelnut trees originated from the Shuswap region of British Columbia, over 1,000 kilometers to the south. And we already know that the wild rice root is another import. This garden area was missed for decades because the people studying indigenous cultures were viewing the land through a colonial lens. They didn't recognize these areas as gardens because the method did not match their understanding of what a garden was. But when you take away the colonial lens and open your mind to consider the possibility that an agricultural practice could have taken place, then things start falling into place. The density of the plants, the variety of species in the area, land cleared of sun-blocking plants like evergreen trees, even combinations of plants that do not grow together in a wild environment, or plants growing outside of the environment they prefer. These are clues that something other than natural selection was at play.
How many species are in the garden?
That's a good question, and it depends what time of year you go. So I think in total, there was something like 89 species just listed one off. We calculated overall what we call indicator species. So these are things that kept showing up consistently in our plots. So not just one or two individuals, but consistently lots. And so these are things like mulks, Pacific crabapple, Winnipdix, hazelnut, Yem, Saskatoon, Lo'ots, red elderberry, Tlaiak, high bush cranberry, Is, soapberry, the rice root, the nodding onion, wild strawberry came up a lot, or woodland strawberry. And so there's 15 to 16 indicator species, which we call, or is what we call them, and those are all kind of the highly ranked Tsimshian foods that we would think of.
A large collection of plants, each species represented by multiple plants, from the large collection of red elderberry and wild roses along the riverbank to thousands of nettle following the trails and on the plateau. To the multiple trees, including wild crabapple, chokecherry, and hazelnut. Each species having different harvest periods, some in the spring, some in the fall, some throughout the year, with each species bringing their own value to the forest garden and to the people of Kitselas. This rediscovery is helping us to understand that our ancestors had a high level of technical knowledge to build the soil, to understand the medicinal, nutritional, utilitarian, and cultural significance of the plants, as well as how and when to harvest. Then to safely preserve the foods for winter.
Is there an estimate of how many people that would support?
This is always a tough question. Population estimates for the Skeena region, for Northwest British Columbia, for even all of Turtle Island are very. Some are very conservative, some are very generous. We actually don't have a really good understanding, for example, of how many people lived at Kitselas Canyon at a given time. So there's a few dates for a few sites where we can get a sense of, okay, there's 17 longhouses, 4 hearths in a longhouse. Okay, we're getting up to, a couple hundred people. But when we start to get dates for concurrent habitations, on the other side of the canyon and downriver a bit, what we see is that there was probably thousands and thousands of people living in the canyon, relying obviously, definitely on riverine foods, salmon, steelhead, that sort of thing. Those were unequivocally important foods, and by upplaying forest gardens, we don't want to downplay the importance of fish. But what it does show is that it wasn't just about fish. It was so much more than that. When we look at the extended Kitselas territory, these really beautiful benched valleys throughout, Cleanza Creek, Copper River, Hardscrabble, this is all incredible hunting territory as well. Mountain goats, deer, today of course moose, but in the past probably elk and the like. So it would be hard to isolate forest gardens and say, okay, it's supporting this many families or this many people, but it's just part of a larger food system and of course land tenure system that Kitselas was part of. But I think, to maybe not to shy away too much from the question, these are meant to be very productive spaces. When we look at forest gardens globally, one of the unique features of them is that you have this kind of dense biomass of food plants in a single area. So rather than the rows that you see, right, with kind of one layer of corn or, one orchard of just hazelnut, what we see is this multi-storied species. So you have, hazelnut and crabapple in the sub-canopy, maybe maple and birch above that. Below you might have some shrub plants like soapberry, and then ground cover plants or root and herbaceous plants like rice root or wild onion. And so these things, the magic of them is the density of all the foods, and so we could confidently say that it's supporting people and a lot of different nutrient needs.
How long ago was the garden actually discovered?
It's a funny thing. Archaeologists like to kind of own discoveries, and I think as much as we've done a lot of work to uncover this forest garden in a new way, I think people have always kind of known something like a forest garden exists at Gitseax in the Kitselas Canyon. Like I said, Webb had this hunch, of what I was describing at Robintown, at Gitseax, in the Kitselas Canyon. He had this hunch it was happening in the canyon as well. So while we've just only recently started to uncover more about the Kitselas Forest Garden, I think people have known about it for a really long time.
For many years, if you asked someone from Kitselas where you could harvest a plant like nettle, they would know where in the Kitselas Canyon it could be found. If you wanted to harvest chokecherry, our people would know where those were as well. The plants were known about, but the history of these plants and the maintenance of this garden changed after abandonment. The colonial methods used to remove the culture from our people, including the intergenerational trauma of residential schools, further damaged our connection to this land.
Because we lost it because it was illegal for us to even speak about our own medicines. Yes, yeah. That's how we ended up losing so much. Actually, you get put in jail for if you got caught. Always had school teachers who monitored us all the time, and we were reported to being an agent.
Oh no!
If we didn't behave.
Oh no! Oh,
Yes,
that's horrible.
so a lot of the things that people did, they hid. You know, they did stuff in secret,
Yes.
and that's how they protected us so that we wouldn't get into trouble. And I think that's how we forgot.
Right.
You know, the stuff we lost.
The success and sustainability of the forest gardens has been studied and appreciated. This method was a more natural way to live within our environment, and similar practices like permaculture are becoming popular.
One of my elders, another archaeologist, a teacher of mine, you know, she's been doing similar work on historical land management, historical land use in pre-colonial eras. She's been doing this for 30 years, and she asked, like, why is there take up now? Why are people excited about this now compared to, say, 30 years ago? And I don't have an answer, but I think one of them might be this concurrent phase we're in between, you know, biodiversity loss and climate change, and people are looking to different solutions to these wicked problems like food supply shortages, the mismanagement of land, and the colonization of land and food systems, and trying to find ways to maybe re-articulate those things in a way that is not just environmentally sound but also culturally sound. And forest gardens, it does those two things at once, and I think that's part of its power, not just in, you know, research or in community, but also in wider popular science. So I think it's catching on, and then at the same time it's like it's this tried and tested method, again, thousands of years, hundreds of cultures doing something similar to a forest garden system. You know, it works. We know it works.
In British Columbia, forest gardens continue to be rediscovered, and we know that the human interaction did not only occur on land. It also happened in the ocean, with human-managed areas to encourage the sustainable production of species like clams. This shellfish mariculture occurred along the coast of British Columbia, Alaska, and Washington State. This rediscovery further expands the technical knowledge Indigenous people had to interact, manage, and facilitate continuous sustainable production on their lands. The Kitselas Forest Garden was an efficient way to produce food, medicine, and utilitarian plants. Plants that could be used for teas, plants that can treat pain, and plants that can be used to make clothing. In an estimated 200 square meters of land that had been maintained by the people of Kitselas for hundreds of years, right next to our village site of Gitseax. And we thought we had learned a lot. But this year, something else happened. We need to step back about 10 years. About the same time that the forest garden was being rediscovered, a logging operation was underway on Kitselas lands to the east of the Kitselas Canyon, further upriver. The logging was a clear-cut operation and opened up the surface of the forest floor to sunlight. What happened next may change the size and scale of the garden.
If we were to put parameters around the Gitseax forest garden, we could say it's a couple hundred square meters. But if you move out, say 1 kilometer north, it looks like it actually picks up again in this area, or just north of Terrace. And so it was probably a much larger ecosystem that was then cut off either by flooding in that back channel, which is kind of at the north end of the canyon, or through other developments, logging and the like. It probably cut off this previously larger distribution. And this is confirmed in some ways when I go upriver into Gitseax country, where I am convinced that the entire Hazelton Valley is a forest garden. So we're talking, hundreds of square kilometers of managed land.
Several of the species of the plants found within the Kitselas Canyon study area began growing in the area that had been clear-cut, leading researchers to theorize that this forest garden may be much bigger than originally thought. It may continue east from the Kitselas Canyon. What is planned for the future of the Kitselas Canyon Forest Garden? More research, more studies, more genetic testing, which will bring more information back to our people and provide a clearer picture of our ancestral practices that we can learn from to reconnect to this special place.